No role plays, no conference calls, no BS. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader. This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Hey everyone, this is Chris.
And Lorenzo.
And welcome to our Best of Saturday series. Now that we have hundreds of episodes, we get a lot of listeners asking us where to start.
So we'll be selecting some of our most popular episodes to share each Saturday from our years of podcasting. We hope you enjoy it.
I want to talk about a post that I saw on LinkedIn that kind of bothered me a little bit a few days ago. And I kept thinking about it, so I thought, okay, there's no better place to kind of hash it out than with you on Hacking Your Leadership. I was just kind of scrolling through my feed. I didn't really have anything to do with kind of wasting time a little bit. And I came across a post from a person who I'm connected to. And I won't say who they are because I'm calling this out as a critique. And honestly, I don't know if they listen to the show. But this person said, it kind of started out like advice for people looking to get hired. And it said, don't ever ask about compensation during your first interview. There's no better way to show that that's what you care about here and not about the work or the job or something like that. And I'm paraphrasing, but I read it and I kind of went, that's ridiculous. And I just kind of scrolled past it and kept going. And then I found myself thinking about it more and more about that phrase, about that comment, and thought, it's okay that he believes that. That's fine. It is what it is. But it started getting me thinking about other instances of this too. Not about that particular belief, but about leaders that I know and leaders that I've worked with who seem to have these kind of moral high ground standpoints or these kind of non-negotiables that aren't really rooted in anything besides their own emotion about the situation or their own kind of personal experience. And now they're trying to kind of blanket the entire world with that particular belief without any flexibility. So I'm wondering, have you come across people like this where they believe something and you can't really even figure out where it's rooted in, let alone why they believe it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because you probably did the same thing I do, which is you start to type a response or a comment, then you delete it.
I did exactly that, yes.
Yeah.
Halfway through, I'm like, it's not worth it, and I just deleted it.
Exactly, right. Yeah, because you're right. Like, it's just not worth it. At the end of the day, it's, whatever. But then it's always fun to go back and check on those and see other people that have the time and are willing to make the comments about it. But it's funny that you mentioned that because I think what you were mentioning and what you were saying was around how many times leaders can become very emotional. Leaders will kind of project their thoughts or feelings or how something made them feel as now a new rule or a new standard or standard operating procedure of how things should go and go down. And I think that's a good example of, one that's just like, it sounds like you interviewed somebody and you didn't like the fact that they asked you about compensation and it made you mad. And then you said, new rule. Nobody's allowed to talk about compensation in the first interview.
Right.
Yet, but the reality is that, well, okay, I can see where maybe you didn't like that or you felt a certain way about it. But at the same time, if what you're talking to them and the job that you're talking to them about does not meet their compensation they're looking for, does not, allow them to pay their bills or do those types of things, then good, because now you're not wasting their time and they're not wasting your time. So absolutely there are leaders that I've worked with, most of them not necessarily in writing like that, but have verbally either given advice or said that, you just can't do it that way, or that's not the right way to do it. And then as you start to ask, like, well, why? Or you start to play the what if game, or, but what if this happened, or what if that happened? And then all of a sudden they get defensive, they get deflective, and then you realize that this is not actually based in anything that makes sense in regards to like the totality of giving somebody advice. It is simply their emotion or their projection of how they feel about something. And so it's not necessarily good advice because, it can be picked apart.
Right. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds on this particular issue because this particular issue itself isn't important. It's more about the overarching theme. But I try to put myself in the shoes of this hiring manager thinking, what would put them in this place? And I think it's passion for the job, passion for the work. So you think, okay, I'm passionate about this work, about this job, about getting this job done, whatever it is, and I want to surround myself with people who are just as passionate about it as I am. Okay, that's actually pretty a righteous kind of cost of admission there. But when that leads you to start having different criteria of what that looks like, instead of letting the people you're talking to define how that looks like for them, now you're getting into what's called gatekeeping, which is an arbitrary set of criteria in order to grant admission into a club, because you're trying to keep the club kind of pure or foundationally rooted in something. And so, like I said, I don't want to go too much into this particular one, but I know leaders who have done this on other things too, not just when it comes to, don't ask for about compensation, but when it comes to things like, I won't ever take the trash out at my job. Mm-hmm. And some of them root it in, well, they think it's beneath them, which I think is ridiculous. Some of them root it in, well, if I'm doing that, it means that I'm clearly not utilizing my talent where it's needed and being able to utilize my talents for the best places it is. So if I'm doing that just to show that I can take the trash out, that's ridiculous. It's like, okay. I mean, I get it how maybe 75% of the time that might work. But these stances that are supposed to apply to 100% of the time, I just can't think of many that hold true. I can't think of many where I can put out a whole bunch of situations and think, yes, this makes sense in every single one of those situations. There's got to be some flexibility there.
Yeah, well, I think two things. Number one, I think the only time where it's 100% is like if it's an integrity thing, it's a policy thing, right? Where it's very, very clear that if you do this, then this happens, and that's it, right? And
right.
So like, you don't steal and expect
Sure.
to keep your job, right? Like, don't get caught stealing and expect to be here. Don't get caught stealing and expect for us to want to rehire you. Like those are things that kind of apply to everybody, and it's non-negotiable. I think as you were talking, what I was thinking of is even outside of this compensation interview example. Where I also see this happen a lot is how leaders will project their career path onto other people that are trying to get the same job, right? So now all of a sudden, well, no. Before you can be that, you have to be this.
Right.
Before I can make you a general manager, you have to be a sales manager. Before you can be at this role, you have to be at that role. And then you start to ask the questions, well, why is that the case? And they may say things like, well, the experience, blah, blah. But then what you find out many times is like, well, that's what they did. And,
right.
and so if that's what they did, then that's what everybody must do. And that's ridiculous, because I can understand if you were only hiring people where maybe like this is the first job they've ever had. They're working this job to gain experience, and then it makes a lot of sense where you want them to do different things to then be able to do all the functions of a job. But the minute you start to hire people, recruit people, or bring people in that bring a wealth of knowledge, background, and experience to the table, well, now those things don't apply anymore, because now you're simply subjectively saying they need to do this because somebody else did. Versus they should be on their own path and have the opportunities given to them based on what they've earned with all of their experience in totality, not just the title of what they got hired in for.
Right, and it becomes this is the way it's done because this is the way it's been done.
Right, yeah. It's what they say. It's the 7 most dangerous words in business. Right? That's the way we've always done it.
That's the way we've always done it. Right.
Yeah.
And when you started doing it that way, maybe it was the right way. I don't know. I mean, some of these policies or these things can go back generations. They can go back years or decades. And maybe they were the right thing to do when it was initially done. But it's laziness to hold on to it simply because it's expedient, or because that's the way it's been done. I agree with you on the whole set of non-negotiables as far as, if you steal from me, you're going to get fired. But I will tell you, a lot of that is rooted in laws that require you to treat employees the same way. And so I've worked with people before who had an employee who they wanted to give a second chance to after an integrity issue. It was a very unique set of circumstances. I didn't necessarily agree with it, but they wanted to give this person a second chance, and they didn't. And they articulated the reason they didn't was because then they were on the hook to give other people a second chance also, and so they had to let that person go. So, and I get it. So a lot of those non-negotiables are rooted in just a requirement of business owners or business leaders to treat their employees the same way and not play favorites. And I get that. But when you're talking about people who don't even work for you to begin with, or when you're talking about non-disciplinary issues, issues related to compensation, or issues related to advancement, or issues related to what teams you can work on, to me, the sky's the limit. To me, the smaller a box you put yourself in as a leader, the more you are excluding the potential of some really great people getting roles or moving up within your organization, or things like that. And to me, this stinks a little bit of what we've heard when we listen to Laszlo Bock at Google, or when we spoke to Scott Miller on our Hacking Your Leadership podcast interview series, when it comes to the tendency of people to want to hire someone who is they're scared of hiring somebody who's better than they are or who could compete with them, and so they hire somebody who's almost as good as they are but not quite. And what that allows them to do is say, okay, I'm validating my own existence, because if they're not as good as I am, now they need me to teach them, number one. And number two, they're not surrounding themselves with people who potentially are a threat to their own job. And I don't want to make this sound like it's a nefarious thing. I don't think there's people in a room somewhere going, how do we make it so no one ever gets hired that can take my job? It's not about that. I think it's subconscious a lot of times. I think it's just people's desire to feel needed, and people's desire to have things fit in a box, and be easily defined, and that just holds them back.
Yeah, well, I think it's one of those things, I think, to your point, subconsciously, where if you found success in a certain way of doing things or a certain process in the past, it's very easy for us to get married to those things and believe
Absolutely.
that that's the maybe not the only way, but in our own mind, it's the best way, right?
Right.
Because I even think of, like, outside of leadership, where I have had certain situations where maybe working with a customer or doing something where that experience went far left and it just caused headache and stress and this whole thing. Well, now I kind of have this feeling of like, this thing that I'm dealing with right now kind of feels like what happened to me 6-7 years ago. So I'm not going to do that, because the last time I did something kind of similar, I got burned. And so, like, I am taking the experience that I had previously and I'm applying that to the current situation, not based on the fact that this is maybe slightly different, but based on the things that are similar. And because I had this experience previously, I'm going to default to that. And I think that happens with leaders in these exact types of scenarios, where, remember that one time that one employee asked me about compensation in the first interview, and then I answered their question, and then they got the job, and it was a problem, and they wanted to get more, and then I had all this thing. So now I got this new rule: don't ever ask about compensation first of all, right? Or remember that one time where I thought that person, had experience and background, and so I gave them the opportunity to have this job, and then it didn't go well, and they left, or they were fired for not being a good leader. Well, I'm not going to make that mistake again. So now everybody has to go through this process. So I think that to me is the danger in looking at things that way and making those types of rules that are simply based in either your own experience, good or bad, and that if it could easily be poked a hole in by somebody just saying, like, well, what about this situation? Then I think that it's something that you need to reconsider and really think about, making sure that it's based in true facts and knowledge, and not just maybe emotion or subconscious experiences.
Right. Well, it's correlation doesn't equal causation. So maybe that employee who asked about compensation, they got hired. Maybe they were just a crap employee. Right. But the fact that they asked about compensation isn't what made them a crap employee. Being a crap employee hasn't made them a crap employee. So the fact that you're trying to, I think it was this person's desire to say, okay, I had a person ask about this. They ended up being a crap employee. I want to try to avoid being in a situation where I hire somebody again who is a crap employee. Okay, so let's look at what the differences are that this employee did that other people didn't do. Let's think back to the beginning. Oh, they asked about compensation in their first interview. That must be a litmus test for who's going to be a crap employee. It's like, I don't know how you got there. Like I get the thought process of why you want to figure out what caused something to happen, but sometimes you can't figure it out. Sometimes it means maybe the reason a crap employee got hired is because you have crap interview skills. Maybe the reason that the crap employee got hired is because you didn't vet them well enough. Maybe they lied to you. Maybe they are a great liar and they were a great interview and a bad employee, and that happens to the best of leaders and the best of hiring managers. And there's nothing you can do about it. So I get why people want to go down this path, but these just kind of like from the mountaintop proclamations, they just don't sit right because almost all of them can have holes poked in them.
Yep, I completely agree. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 Minute Hack.
The 1 Minute Hack.
All right, for this episode's 1 Minute Hack, we're going to talk a little bit about stupid rules. If you've been listening to this episode and you have found yourself thinking, I have a few of these rules of my own, and you don't think they're stupid. You think that these are things that have kept you safe. They're things that have kept you making the right decisions with your people, but they're kind of these non-negotiables or rules that you have personally that you think have helped you guide yourself in your leadership roles over the years. What I want you to do is write them down. Write down what you think these rules are. It could be something like, don't ask about compensation during the first interview. Anything that is a non-negotiable or something that you do it this way because you think this is the right way to do it. Write them all down, and I want you to take partners, as many as you can, but at least 3 or 4 people who you have really good relationships with, people who will give you feedback, positive, negative. They'll tell it to you straight, and I want you to tell them these rules that you have, and I want you to ask them to pick holes in them. I want you to ask these people to tell you how they think these rules don't apply. If after you've partnered with several people, they can't pick any holes in them, and they say, yeah, those are pretty good rules, we think they apply to every situation, then you might be on the right track. Again, there is no 100% of the time this is right or wrong here, but a lot of these rules that leaders put themselves into, a lot of these boxes that we paint ourselves into, are not rooted in any fact at all. They're rooted in our own emotion, and if you can get people to poke holes in them, you might find yourself being able to put some of them aside and make better decisions, better hiring decisions, better promoting decisions, better people decisions going forward.
Yeah, I think it's a great 1 minute hack, and in full transparency, we all have them, right? It's not a matter of if you have them or if you don't. We all have them. Mm-hmm. It's just a great reminder of making sure that we're self-accountable to not implement so many of them. And if you have some of them, even if you can not necessarily eliminate them, but make some adjustments that make them more reasonable, then I think it's a good move.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. They're often rooted in good. They're rooted in your desire to do something well. They're rooted in your desire to make sure that you're protecting yourself, protecting your team, protecting your company. And so they start off in this really good place, but they're rooted in a very small subset of data. And as that data expands and as you try to apply them to multiple places, that's when a lot of them stop holding water. And so the quicker you can do this, I think the better off you'll be.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode